Hello, welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 202, and I am the show's host, Kyle. Going to be talking a lot about North Korea today and the developments between the summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong Un. A lot to catch up on, as last week I really didn't cover many current events. I had a few special guests on the podcast to celebrate the 200th episode. Anthony Samaroff was on episode 199. We kind of just discussed the nature of war. Scott Horn joined the show for episode 200, and we talked about Shiite politics in Iraq and how, important and critical this was to the recent elections in Iraq, and then Scott's take on the election in Iraq. And we also covered Afghanistan a little bit as well, and just the endless quagmire there. And then I had Mance Raider on the show on episode 201 to discuss the Pulse nightclub shooting, the situation in Israel, and, some of our favorite anti-war memes, as on Twitter, at MN Rothbard. He has some of the, best anti-war memes out there. So check out those shows. I've gotten some great feedback on them. If you haven't gotten to listen to them yet, definitely worth listening to. As for all the content, you can find it at foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com or at the libertarianinstitute.org, and you can find my daily news roundup there as well. Alright, so the last time I talked about North Korea on this show, we are definitely kind of at the point where Trump had canceled the talks, and North Korea was out there saying they're still willing to engage in talks. Trump was saying that he's still willing to engage in talks. The U.S. was sending the envoy to plan for the Singapore summit, even though Trump had already canceled it, kind of saying that, well, if we decide to want to do it, it's important that we have these talks now, so we're going anyways. And we also had a quite surprising summit between North and South Korea, the leaders there, Kim Jong Un and Moon Jae-in, shaking hands, and the South Korean leader later saying that he was perplexed by the U.S. decision to withdraw from the talks in Singapore on June 12th and was disappointed. Of course, on this show in the past, I've talked about how South Korean President Moon Jae-in seems to be a true lifelong believer of Korean peace and somebody whose real goal is to end the Korean War and to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. And he seems to be really pushing all sides of this matter to take the necessary steps to make that happen. I think he has even gone so far as to, sacrifice giving himself the credit for the success as of so far, and giving it to Donald Trump in the United States to boost Trump's ego and make him more invested in this. I find it interesting that, Moon Jae-in may seem to be the best world leader, at least at this point, in kind of reading Donald Trump and getting him to play into what Donald Trump wants to do. It certainly seems like he has been effective in moving Donald Trump from saying things that are very hawkish about North Korea and just kind of continuing the U.S. policy, which was a policy under Obama. It was a policy at the start of Trump, which is if the North Koreans give up their nuclear weapons, then we'll talk to them. But now we're in a situation where we're in talks and North Korea has not given up their nuclear weapons. And of course, the U.S. policy under Obama and the start of Trump's presidency was absolutely terrible. North Korea was never going to give up their nuclear weapons without first getting concessions and agreements from the Americans. And it seems that the, the North Koreans, have been willing, to seek lesser concessions from the Americans, like allowing the Americans to leave their troops in South Korea, but still looking for those security guarantees and stuff like that. Now, the next announcement we get is, I believe that he is the vice chair of the Communist Party, or the ruling party of North Korea, and this is Kim Yong Chol, and he's the former leader of the North Korean spy agency, and he visits the United States and meets with Mike Pompeo. Well, first we have the announcement of this visit. We also have in here a story that comes out that says the White House actually withheld putting on additional sanctions against North Korea, I guess because they knew these talks were going to happen. And so, the White House policy on North Korea is very interesting in these few days. I mean, we go from Trump withdrawing from the talks against North Korea, John Bolton constantly coming out with this very hawkish Libya style denuclearization policy. And I get in depth in, why the Libyan style denuclearization won't work, in, I believe it's episode 198 or 196, and that's Libyan style. So, that's a very hawkish stance. And then suddenly we have a very lighter stance, with withholding the sanctions, allowing a sanctioned member of sanctioned North Korean citizen coming to the United States and meeting with Mike Pompeo. And after that meeting with Pompeo, Pompeo comes out and says, we've made some real progress here towards having talks. Then Kim Jong Chol meets with Donald Trump. I think it was like a 90-minute meeting, and John Bolton was not in attendance. At that meeting, he gave a letter to Donald Trump from Kim Jong Un. After that meeting, Donald Trump announced that the Singapore summit was back on. And at that summit, he said, we can have fast denuclearization, we can have slow denuclearization. In there, he kind of, played around with that. If it's faster, you'll get the economic relief sooner, it'll be a better deal for you. But if it's slower, we could do that too. It just won't be as good of a deal. But it seems Donald Trump has gotten the word, that people who understand how this denuclearization process will go, and I don't mean from the political standpoint, but from the logistical standpoint, because we are talking about 30 or so nuclear weapons and possibly hydrogen weapons as well, that the U.S. is going to have to negotiate with North Korea how they go about dismantling these weapons. Of course, there's a lot of, information that the United States will learn if North Korea ends up giving these weapons to the United States. So maybe they go to China or Russia instead. If they do come to the U.S., of course, I'm sure there'll be a lot of logistical problems with the fact that these are nuclear weapons, the most powerful weapons in the world. And so a lot of care has to be put in dealing with them. John Bolton's suggestion is that we're going to put all this in Tennessee, just like we did with the Libyan nuclear program. Well, a big difference between the Libyan nuclear program and the North Korean one is that Libya didn't have nuclear weapons and North Korea has about 30 of them. And so if you're going to start driving or flying a whole bunch of North Korean nuclear weapons over the United States, there may be some Americans that aren't so happy about that kind of thing. And it sounds like a real kind of logistical nightmare to try to relocate 30 of these weapons from a regime that will probably want to, carry out this process slowly and not, show their whole hand. So they're not going to tell the United States where every single nuclear weapon is located, which are, what, if any, are on missiles and stuff like that. So right now, it does definitely seem like there is progress to be made in the talks between North Korea and the United States and Singapore just over a week from now. This is absolutely something we could, be looking forward to and hope this summit goes very well. It seems that Donald Trump understands that a deal, with actual signatures may not be met at this, first talk. Maybe they'll sign something that says we have an agreement to further talks and towards denuclearization or something like that. But at this first round of talks, just in part because of all the logistical problems, you're not going to have North Korea saying, we'll give up one nuclear weapon on June 4th and then another one on September 5th. In exchange, the U.S. will do this and that. So all is looking good here. If anybody wants to check out the recent writing by Justin Raimondo, I'll link to an article in the show notes page. He's definitely taking some victory laps on this because anytime there's a falter, I guess is the way to say it, in these, talks between the United States and North Korea, if Trump says something or Kim Jong Un says something that isn't exactly positive, everybody jumps out and says, we told you the North Koreans were just trying to play Donald Trump. They're, trying to get sanctions or relief in exchange for nothing or gain legitimacy for the Un regime by playing around with these talks, but then ultimately they're going to pull out. And yet every hurdle so far they've been able to overcome. And, we're now closing in on the talks. And despite John Bolton being the national security advisor, we're continuing to move towards talks. So good news all around. The only other thing on this I'll say is I think some people are buying a little too heavily into the Trump is winning 3D chess here kind of thing. Again, I think it's, the Koreans and specifically the South Koreans and Moon Jae-in that are really pushing these talks in the right direction and facilitating everything. And I guess Trump is just lucky that he sits atop of an empire so large that even his belligerence it isn't enough to kind of cover up for the fact that we have so many nuclear weapons and we're so powerful that other countries will make really large concessions to the United States. And, I don't think this is necessarily something that Trump fully understands or is planning every step along the way. And it's more like his advisor, John Bolton, kind of getting in there and trying to screw up the talks because John Bolton's a hawk on North Korea, who, by his own admission, believes that the North Koreans are talking that they are lying and doesn't trust them. So he he's influencing Trump in the wrong direction. And even when that happens, Moon Jae-in's able to, work things out. Other thing going on with North Korea is they had a meeting with the Russians, and they have set up a summit for Kim Jong Un to visit with Vladimir Putin in, I believe, Moscow, in Russia, coming up sometime this summer. So that seems to be another step in the right direction. And one thing I want to do on the show notes page is link to an episode of the Scott Horton Show where Peter Van Buren is the guest, and Peter talks about who Kim Jong Un is and why he's taking these steps. One of the things that I've talked about with Will Porter, I believe we talked about this on the show, but one of the inherent problems that you have if you're North Korea with denuclearization, peace with the South, and forming a better relationships is that there's a lot of families on each side of the border, and no doubt they'll want to visit each other. And once they do, the North Koreans are going to realize pretty quickly they live lives of absolute squalor and have no justice and an oppressive government that has made their lives very much worse off, because South Korea is one of the richest countries in the world. Seoul is a very advanced city, and people in North Korea regularly starve to death. And so, what's Kim Jong Un's play here? How is he going to manage this? How is there not going to be an uprising in North Korea against the state? And one of the things that Peter points out that I don't think many people know is Kim Jong Un was educated in Europe. I believe he said that Kim likely speaks English or French. He did, his education under a false identity and stuff, but was apparently social and was able to make friends. And yet this isn't the side of Kim Jong Un that's ever reported. Also, you have the role of his sister becoming bigger in North Korea and kind of being some of the face of the North Korean regime. And this is something that in the past was not tolerated at all. Women were, very oppressed in North Korea. And while this is only one small example, the way the United States portrays Saudi Arabia taking any steps towards, being more equal in their treatment of women, you have a lot of praise. Yet here's Kim Jong Un doing this as well. Also, you have like the story about them saying that he killed his wife, and that turned out not to be true as well. So he may not be quite the tyrant that he's always portrayed to be. Although, he does sit atop a very oppressive state with prison camps. Can't excuse that. But Kim Jong Un may have a bigger plan here overall. And so I'll link to that episode so you guys could figure out a little bit more of who Kim Jong Un is. I want to talk about a few things going on in Europe because they're pretty important. Poland offered the United States $2 billion to build a permanent military base in Poland. So I think some people are going to say, this sounds like a good idea. It definitely sounds like something that's meant to appeal to Donald Trump, kind of renting out our military, which is essentially what this is. Although these bases are very expensive to maintain and are very burdensome for the U.S. taxpayer. So while we may get some upfront money, in the long run, this is going to end up costing us money, and also taking U.S. troops away from their homes, away from their, friends and families for absolutely no reason. A new NATO command center is being built in southern Germany, and the U.S. is now thinking about putting THAAD missiles in Germany. This will, of course, upset Russia pretty heavily. One of Russia's big complaints, and one of the reasons they say they've modernized their nuclear weapons arsenal, is because of U.S. anti-missile defense systems all over Eastern Europe and the United States withdrawal from the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002 prompted, Russia to upgrade their nuclear weapons. Of course, this is a big push from John Bolton, and, maybe now that he's getting frozen out of the North Korea situation, he's looking for new reasons to spend money on these missile defense systems. Another note from Europe, a European court, and I guess this is like the European court, found that Lithuania and Romania hosted CIA blast sites after 9/11 and during the terror war. This now requires those countries to, admit to it and then carry out investigations and prosecutions of people who were involved in torture or illegal crimes, which, anybody within Romania and Lithuania were certainly in violation of numerous crimes and crimes against humanity and war crimes if they were kidnapping and torturing people in these CIA blast sites, like I'm pretty sure is, what was going on. So maybe we could see some justice for the U.S. torture program here. An interesting news story coming out of India, and that is India will not comply with U.S. sanctions on Iran. This is big because, India is a huge country, 1 billion people, very close within the neighborhood of Iran. I'm sure, through the Indian Ocean there, they share some pretty quick sea routes, to each other's country that would enable a lot of trade. And India has a kind of odd place in the U.S. orbit where the U.S. is looking to sell, I believe, our Patriot missiles to India, while India is also at the same time considering the S-400 missiles from Russia. India has long-time disputes with its neighbor Pakistan and China, and the U.S. in a way has seeming to be warming up to India in this dispute for a while, especially with mostly with Trump's anti-Pakistan rhetoric when it comes to the Afghan war. But I think it proves, the U.S. isn't able to flex that muscle and get India to comply with these sanctions. One of the other impacts of the U.S. sanctions on Iran is that it's really going to hurt the Afghan economy. If you look at Afghanistan, it's a landlocked country. However, there's a port in southern Iran that could easily take trade from, that port into Afghanistan. However, if there's sanctions on Iran, this won't be able to happen. I want to wrap up by talking about Yemen. Saudi Arabia continues their march towards the port of Hodeida. This has long been warned that if Saudi Arabia tries to take this port, it's going to spark the famine in Yemen. We already have 22 million of the, between 25 and 8 million Yemeni people in desperate need of humanitarian aid. Over 400,000 children, severely malnourished, meaning that they're starving to death. These are the, kids that cry in hunger pain all the time. They actually need medical treatment. They can't just, get more food a lot of times because they, can't handle eating food because they've eaten so little. And, for these people, things are very bad in, Saudi Arabia, I think now within like 15 kilometers of moving into that port. And I guess it's important, I should mention here, that they're not actually Saudi troops. They're mercenaries and troops loyal to the Hadi portion of the Yemeni government, backed by Saudi airstrikes and UAE airstrikes and the United States. My guess is that a large portion of these troops are Sudanese mercenaries. I know Sudan was sending 3,000 more mercenaries around the time this offensive was supposed to start. It seems like Saudi Arabia has been making quick progress in this offensive, especially compared to the rest of the war being very stalemated over the past 3 years. I mean, it wasn't probably since the initial Houthi offensive where they took the capital city of Sana'a and then moved all the way south near Aden that, this much territory has really traded hands so quick in this war. And that was, 3-ish years ago. I think one of the things that's important to remember is the fighting for the port is going to disrupt and probably prevent any aid from getting into that port while fighting is going on. And so that's immediately going to cut off food supplies for a lot of, people, especially in northern Yemen. But even once Saudi Arabia takes the port, you're going to have a situation where there's all new lines that these goods need to cross. At least now, they could, if goods need to cross into Yemen through Hodeida, they're coming in and it's under Houthi control, and then, it could disperse through Houthi control. If it has to come in through a Saudi-backed forces controlled port, then those forces are going to have to look to cross, goods are going to have to cross battle lines in order to make it to northern Yemen. A lot of people say that the Houthis that the Saudis trying to take this port is proof that, they're really just trying to starve the Houthis out and make conditions in Yemen so unlivable that the people in northern Yemen have to surrender. Although it's a large portion of the population, it's the richest portion of the population of Yemen, and it looks like the Houthis are going to fight. I just read a report before I went on today saying that the Houthis are sending some reinforcements to Hodeida to try to, I guess, push back against this Saudi-backed offensive here. Hard to say what the success will be just because Saudi does have overwhelming air power. Now, one of the things I've noticed we're seeing a lot of reports on as Saudi Arabia has taken grounds, they've been taking apart a lot of Houthi minefields. And so there's a lot of reporting and coverage on how terrible these minefields are for the civilian population who are just, trying to go about their lives the best they can and get food, in these desperate times, and that these landmines kill a lot of people. And it's important to remember that just because the United States is on the side of the, Saudi-backed government in Yemen, and this is the side that has killed so many people and committed so many atrocities in Yemen, the Houthis are no angels either. They've likely carried out torture They've imprisoned journalists. They've imprisoned other Western people, I think more or less using them as human shields. And they also, use these indiscriminate landmine tactics that I guess are probably pretty effective of slowing the enemy down, especially when the Houthis don't have any of their own air power. So it's very difficult for them to, stop the enemy from advancing over large open areas. However, it kills a lot of civilians and, you can't lose sight of that. Speaking of terrible things going on in Yemen, the new NDAA, which is the National Defense Authorization Act that gets passed every year. The House has passed an amendment in there that will include an investigation of the United States role in UAE torture prisons in southern Yemen. These torture prisons are known to have something called a pit, where I guess they basically stick people on a barbecue pit and spin them around above a fire. There's been some reporting that the United States is at least involved in that. They have ships off sea, and they have troops come in and are around and in the prisons. And again, the UAE is part of that Saudi Arabia coalition that the United States supports in Yemen, and the United States carries out mid-air refueling for that coalition. While most of the airstrikes come by Saudi Arabia, the UAE also carries out airstrikes as well. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis wrote a pretty good article explaining that the new information about the Green Berets being deployed to southern Saudi Arabia to help Saudi Arabia fight against the Houthis is important enough information that the Senate should untable the Yemen War Powers Act and re-debate and examine that resolution. It was very close. I mean, it didn't fail by that much. And the Pentagon did lie to Congress and tell them that, we didn't have troops on the ground supporting Saudi Arabia. It turns out we do. All right, that's where I'm going to wrap up the show today. I'll be updating other situations later this week. I got a lot of Israel stuff, Afghanistan, Africa, Syria. So, it'll be a full week of shows. I hope to have at least one guest on later in the week. Maybe get Will Porter on. And I hope you all enjoying it. Think about giving me ratings and reviews on iTunes, YouTube, wherever else. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, libertarianinstitute.org, immersionnews.com is the new news website, Immersion News on YouTube and BitChute, Libertarian Union on Facebook, and at KYAAALE on Twitter.